The first thing anyone noticed was the red on Torrhen's sleeve. Not his oath chain, not the elk bone gavel, not the three elders to his left trying to look like they had always harbored doubts. Red, dried almost brown at the cuff where Brindle had brushed past him in the crush before dawn. Torrhen stood in the ritual circle at the Hall of Antlers with both palms spread as if weighing justice itself, while Alexander held up a wax-sealed casualty ledger in one hand and a lime-stiff strip of canvas in the other. The seal was still whole, stamped with the crown knot. Era stood on the stone dais with her chin lifted, shoulders squared, and 84 witness marks already cut into the hall ledger board by the door clerk. Brindle pressed against Ira's boot, shoulder bandaged, yellow eyes fixed on Torrhen's throat as if she knew exactly how much distance lay between them and had measured it twice. Morning light came in through the antler rafters in narrow spears, striking old dust and making every movement visible. The red stain on Torrhen's embroidered cuff looked darker every time he lifted his hand. The casualty tally for 17 hamlets was altered, Alexander said, voice pitched to carry under the rafters without becoming a shout. Twice, by a hand that expected no audit and no challenge. He held the sealed ledger high enough for the benches to see the unbroken wax, then lowered it slightly and shook the strip of canvas once. Fine white powder came off it and drifted in the light. You summoned forced pairing bids against a woman you needed publicly broken. Sable stepped from the witness rail and set a salt bag on the floor stones with a hard thump that made several people flinch. White grains leaked where the seam had split. He's not lying, she said. Her voice had market weight. Plain, hard, impossible to miss. I sold Torrhen's men lime and canvas before moonrise at both False Kill Roads. They paid in rings from the court pouch. Her thumb left a chalky print on the bag as she pointed at Torrhen. You can smell that lime now if you want to pretend you can't see it. Torrhen lifted his chin toward the gallery and made his voice ceremonial, as if cadence could erase substance. The hall will proceed by statute. Claims offered yesterday remain active until completed. He turned to Era with a smile that showed no teeth. Your resistance has been entertaining. It ends now. Before he could raise the gavel, Brindle lunged half a step and bared her teeth. Not to bite, to block. Her body went rigid, weight forward, a wall of muscle and scar and refusal. The hall inhaled in one body. Someone near the back muttered a prayer. Someone else hissed for silence. Era placed a steady hand between Brindle's ears without looking down. Alexander moved into the circle opposite Torrhen and set the sealed ledger on the claim stone where every witness could see it. Read your own oath text, he said, the line you made novices memorize. Torrhen's jaw flexed once. Alexander spoke it for him, each word clipped clean. Coerced claims stand void where evidence is fabricated before levy or right. He tapped the ledger cover with 2 fingers. Your line, your seal, your court. The gavel struck stone once, sharp enough to bounce in the ribs and leave a thin ringing behind it. Then the story turned backward, to the afternoon before dawn broke him. In 1427, when autumn frost still clung to the iron hinges and did not melt until midday, Ira Vale was called into the Hall of Antlers like a debtor. She entered with herb stains under her nails, burrs caught in the hem of her outer wool, and dried marsh clay at the edge of one boot. 6 years had passed since she left the Pack Center in 1421 and took lease on the old river strip beyond the statute boundary, far enough that winter winds hit hard and close enough that levy riders could still find her door. She had paid levy in dried tinctures, winter roots, and ring coin every season since. She had signed each tally line in her own hand. None of that mattered once Torrhen struck the dais and spoke the charge in ritual cadence that flattened people into categories. Lawless solitude, rejection of bonded oversight, refusal of lawful claim channels. He gestured to the same black stone used for mating rights and debtor adjudications, one side polished smooth by generations of knees and palms. Step to the claim side. Era did not move until the door clerk scratched the witness count into the hall ledger. 84. The scrape of stylus on treated bark sounded like insect legs along a wall. She crossed then, boots ringing against stone, and stood where claim ink waited in a shallow bowl beside an iron stylus. Someone from the benches muttered, 300 rings, and she still thought she could live alone. Torin amplified it with a nod and formal tone. Fine demanded for forced levy refusal, 300 silver rings, or submission to pairing bids as remedial order. A runner unrolled the list of eligible claimants. No names spoken, only numbers and holdings, because this was meant to feel administrative rather than predatory. Torin announced each as if reading grain totals. North Kiln allotment, South Marsh rights, 2 cattle lines, mill access rights under winter extension. Men rose, bowed to the dais, and sat with eyes on Era as if she were a parcel map and boundary dispute combined. One rubbed his thumb against forefinger where claim ink would usually stain. Another kept checking Torin's expression before daring to look at her directly. Era's right hand curled against her thigh hard enough to leave crescent marks in skin. She uncurled it, then curled it again. At the back rail, Sable Kesh lifted her chin and requested voice. Torin gave a thin nod. State relation. Trader, neighbor. She pays what is due. Sable tapped the salt scale weight hanging from her belt. I carried her levy bundles myself in spring and again before harvest. We are not tallying roots, Torin said. We are correcting civic disorder. Era tasted copper where she had bitten the inside of her cheek. Civic disorder is your phrase for a woman who keeps her own door. Murmurs rolled across the benches, then flattened when Torin lifted his gavel. You left the center 6 years ago without bonded sponsor. You deny authority over your breeding and your land continuity. That denial is contagious if not remedied. Contagious, Era repeated, and a corner of her mouth twitched like she had been offered spoiled broth. Say disobedient if that's what you mean. He ignored her and gestured toward the entrance arch. The Crown Auditor has arrived. Let the record show this tribunal proceeds under external observation. Alexander Wildfire stepped in wearing travel dust and a dark cloak clasped with no house symbol. He carried a leather packet sealed in red wax under one arm and nothing at his belt but a short knife used for bread and cord. His boots were road-scuffed. His posture was not. The hall shifted around him the way dogs shift around weather. Dangerous restraint sat on him like tailored cloth, shoulders easy, hands open, eyes measuring exits and threat lines without hurry. Torin spread both hands in performative welcome. Emissary, you witnessed today's correction. Alexander's gaze crossed the benches, the claimstone, the ink bowl, then landed on Era for a heartbeat before returning to Torin. I came to audit border deaths in 17 hamlets, he said. I did not come to enforce mating law. The sentence dropped like a hammer into water. Ripples everywhere, heads turning, a clerk freezing mid-note, one bidder swearing under his breath, then stopping when he realized he had been heard. Torin's smile thinned further. Observation does not exempt this hall from its duties. I did not ask exemption. Alexander set the sealed packet on the side table in plain view, fingers leaving no dust print on the wax. I asked clarity. My mandate concerns casualty irregularities and levy distortions. Era watched him from the corner of her sight. He stood between her and the benches by accident or intent. Either way, 2 bidders shifted as if the air had changed density. Torin started reciting penalty language before anyone could ask what levy distortions meant. As he read, Ira turned her head fully and met Alexander's eyes. It lasted 1 breath beyond propriety and 2 beyond safety. No smile, no flinch, just recognition of pressure from opposite sides of the same trap. Torin's voice continued over them, words about correction and lineage and civic repair, But Era heard only fragments because that held contact threaded through her ribs like pulled wire. When she looked away, her pulse had moved up into her throat. Alexander had not moved at all except for one careful inhale. Torin slammed the gavel. Sentence pending completion of claim mark. A clerk brought forward the iron stylus and claim ink bowl. The ink smelled of oak gall and smoke and old iron. Era was ordered to bare her wrist. She did not. So Torin nodded toward the nearest bidder. The man stood, half eager and half frightened, and reached. Alexander stepped forward first, not touching anyone, just occupying the strip of stone between Era and the reaching hand. No one lays mark until the auditor verifies casualty grounds, he said. Torin's nostrils flared. That is not your lane. Fabricated grounds would void this proceeding under your own oath, Alexander replied. I won't watch you waste a haul. He turned slightly toward Era and lifted his fingers toward her wrist where the vein beat under skin. Not touching. Stopping with the smallest visible gap, close enough that heat might pass and ink might not. Every person in the hall could see he paused there and chose restraint. Era's hand opened, then closed again around empty air. She felt the absence like contact. From the west door came a low growl that rolled across stone like distant thunder. Brindle entered with one ear torn, one shoulder scarred white under dark fur, and mud dried on her paws. She moved straight to Era and planted her broad chest against Era's shin, body angled toward the benches. Her lip lifted over a broken canine. Several bidders stepped back. One dropped his token ring, which skittered, spun, and settled near the claim bowl with a tiny metallic click. Torin struck the dais hard enough to crack the sound. Remove that animal. She has a name, Era said. Remove it. Two hall guards advanced with hooked poles. Brindle did not retreat. She shifted weight and held ground, tail rigid, breath rough in her chest. Era moved with her, hand in ruff. You'll do this in front of 84 witnesses? She asked Torin. I will preserve order in front of 84 witnesses, he snapped. The first pole snagged Brindle's band at the neck. She twisted, snarled, and the hook slid down, ripping skin across her shoulder where old scar met new wound. Blood spattered the stone in a clean arc. Dark drops against pale granite, then a streak as she was dragged sideways. Era lunged and was caught at the elbow by Alexander, his grip firm without wrenching. Not now, he murmured close enough that only she could hear. You go now, and he wins twice. Brindle was hauled toward the side door, nails scraping grooves in stone. She kept her eyes on Era until the door slammed. Sable shouted from the rail, Write that blood into the ledger then, if this is your lawful order. Torin banged the gavel until the sound swallowed her words, and the guard nearest her laid a hand on his own baton. Recess, Torin declared. Claim completion at dawn. The crowd spilled into corridors smelling of tallow and wet wool and old smoke. Voices rose and broke apart. Speculation, disapproval, excitement disguised as moral concern. Era stood in the cleared hall with her sleeve torn where Alexander had caught her. She yanked free and rounded on him. You don't touch me because he says so, but you touch me because you decide so? I touched you to keep you from a spear hook. Don't protect me if the price is obedience. His jaw tightened. Then hear this plain. I'm not here to own you, mark you, or steer your life. I am here because dead wolves appeared where no wolves died, and someone is feeding this hall lies with your name tied to them. Her breath came sharp through her nose. You think I can't survive this alone. I think you already have. 6 years of it. The words hit differently than she expected. She looked toward the side door where Brindle had vanished and swallowed once. I need to find her. I know where they pen-seized animals, he said. The antechamber behind the south stair. Come before Torin posts watchers. The antechamber smelled of old parchment, vinegar wash, damp fur, and old wool soaked in too many winters. A single brazier smoked near the wall. Brindle lay on a grain sack with flank heaving, shoulder torn but not deep enough to hit bone. Her eyes snapped toward the door. When she saw Ira, she made a low sound and tried to rise. "Stay," Ira said, already kneeling. "Stay, old girl." She pressed clean cloth to the wound and whistled through her teeth for calm. Brindle's ears flattened, then eased when Ira scratched the spot under her jaw that always reset her breathing. Alexander stood in the doorway until Ira jerked her chin toward a basin. "Boil that. Now." He obeyed without comment. Metal rang on stone, water sloshed, flame caught. He rolled sleeves without being told twice. Steam began to rise. Sable slipped inside carrying a pouch of ground comfrey and a look sharpened by anger. "I got past the rail before they posted a boy." She dropped to one knee beside Era. "She bled down the corridor. I saw where they dragged her before they shoved her in here." Era tied off the cloth with steady hands. "I'll need that trail later. Remember every turn." Sable nodded once. "I do." She touched Brindle's flank, then Era's shoulder, brief and hard. "I'll be where I can hear the shifts." She left before anyone could mark her missing. When the room settled, only fire crackle and Brindle's breath filled it. Alexander handed Era the steaming basin. Their fingers brushed because neither pretended otherwise. She scrubbed blood from Brindle's fur, jaw clenched, and rinsed cloth after cloth until the water in the basin turned pink, then gray. Brindle licked the back of Era's hand once and went still. Era sat back on her heels. She stared at the bloodied rag in her lap, then lifted her eyes to Alexander. "Don't mistake this. I don't want rescue." Alexander crouched opposite her, forearms on knees. "Good. I'm bad at being wanted for rescue." Her mouth almost curved despite herself. "What I want is worse." He waited, not filling the silence. She met his gaze deliberately, each word chosen and laid down like stones in river current. "I want you. Not because Torin put us in one room. Not because this hall thinks I need a man to legalize my body. I want you because when you stood by that stone and did not touch me, I knew exactly what your hands could do, and exactly what you would refuse to do." Alexander inhaled slowly, as if the air had weight, and he meant to carry it, rather than let it crush him. "I want you too," he said. "Not as prize, not as claim settlement. I wanted you from the first time you looked at me like I was answerable." Brindle thumped her tail once against the sack, then licked Era's wrist where a faint ink smear from the claim bowl had dried. Era laughed under her breath, raw and brief, and wiped at the spot with her thumb without success. She stood, wiped her hands on linen, and moved toward the door. "Then help me end him before dawn." Alexander rose with her. "Tell me where to start." They left the antechamber by the rear stair cut into the hall wall, narrow steps worn hollow by years of boots and ritual processions. Outside, evening wind carried iron and river rot from the marsh edge. Era paused midway, where moonlight caught the curve of Alexander's throat. Sweat had dried in a salt line along his collar despite the cold. She could smell steel from the stair rail under her palm and that iron salt scent from his skin when he turned toward her. He stopped one step below so they stood almost level, faces close enough that speaking quietly still reached. No one spoke for several beats. Era's pulse jumped at her wrist where claim ink had nearly gone. Alexander's thumb hovered near that spot and dropped back to his side, restraint reasserted by visible effort. She leaned without deciding to. He matched the motion halfway, then both checked themselves at the same instant, foreheads nearly touching, breath shared, eyes open. "Later," she said. "After evidence," he answered. They broke apart and descended into the alley behind the hall, where Brindle's blood trail marked the stones in dark commas. The trail led west, then north, then through a service gate Torin's men used for hauling refuse and split firewood. Era crouched at each smear, reading direction by drag width and paw print overstep. Brindle followed despite bandage, nose low, growl rumbling whenever Torin's scent crossed the track. Alexander carried a shuttered lantern and the sealed casualty ledger under his cloak, unwilling to leave it in any room Torin controlled. Sable joined them at the old salt cart with a canvas roll under one arm and muttered, "If we're caught, I was never here." Era gave one short nod. Sight one. She knew it because 3 days prior she had harvested feverwort there, filling both satchel pockets while skylarks screamed over reed beds and midges swarmed her neck. She remembered where her knife had snagged a root and where Brindle had rolled in dry grass. No carcass then, no blood, no wolves circling. Now lime dust ringed a shallow pit under brush, and torn hide scraps were scattered too neatly across the verge. Too visible, too arranged. Alexander knelt and touched the soil with gloved fingers, then dug 2 inches with the edge of his knife and lifted a clump. No root disturbance below this layer, pit opened and covered same night. Whoever did it didn't expect someone who reads ground. Sable unrolled canvas and revealed pieces she had taken from her store records and sweepings, twine cut from the same spool used at market, lime clumps with salt contamination from her stall floor, and 2 ring press slips folded tight. "I sold these to Torin's men after moonrise," she said. "They asked for enough to treat rot fast and hide smell." Era lifted a hide scrap and sniffed. Goat, not wolf, dried before it was planted. Brindle pawed at the pit edge and whined. Blood from her shoulder dotted the dirt and ran into scrape marks left by dragging sacks. Alexander followed the line of her nose to a wagon rut leading toward the second road. They staged both sites from one cart. They moved before moon climbed higher. The path to Site 2 crossed low ground where reed stems rattled against each other in the wind. Twice they froze when they heard distant voices, but they were only fishers on the river track and passed without seeing lantern light. Brindle limped, stubborn and silent, except for occasional rough breaths when the wound tugged. At Site 2, the false scene was sloppier. Bones with knife scoring too clean for scavengers, fur clumps snagged under a thorn hedge, and a split canvas sack half buried under loose soil. The lime had caked in white crust where damp seeped through. Era held up a stalk of crushed yarrow. "I cut this stand 3 days ago. Fresh stems then. These were trampled after. You can still smell the break." She looked at Alexander. He needed new deaths to justify emergency levy. Alexander set the lantern on the cart hood and placed the sealed ledger beside it. "We open it now, together, and we do not let it leave our hands after." He held the ledger flat while Era checked the wax. Crown knot intact. No side cuts. No heat marks. She nodded. He broke the seal with his thumb, and the wax cracked loud in the stillness. Pages showed entries for 17 hamlets, each with casualty marks and assessed penalties. 2 dates had been altered to include the false sites. He ran a finger under the scraped numbers and tipped the page so lantern light showed raised fibers. Original entry beneath this one had lower losses, then amended again. He turned another page. "Here, here." His voice stayed controlled, but a muscle in his cheek jumped. He inflated death counts to trigger Crown relief grain. Relief grain means transport contracts. Transport contracts mean rings skimmed before winter. Sable spat into the ditch. And a public conviction makes anyone asking questions look like they defend lawbreakers. Era straightened, hands dirty to the wrist. "He targeted me because I'm visible and alone. Convict me on the claim stone. Everyone sees authority working. No one asks why wolves died in pairs on roads with no pack spoor." Brindle gave a low bark toward the dark ridge. No one answered from there. Only wind through dry grass and the knock of a loose cart pin. Alexander closed the ledger and wrapped it back in oilcloth. We need testimony clean and tight at dawn. First your account of the sights, then Sable's purchase proof. Then chain his removal order to Brindle's blood trail and this pit. Sable grimaced. I testify, and Torin blacklists my stall by noon. Era faced her squarely. If you stay silent, he owns the scales anyway. Sable held her gaze for a long moment, then exhaled through her teeth. Then I'll speak loud enough that even the rafters hear it. They returned to the hall by the riverside where carved elk heads watched from the lintel. Torches burned low and spat resin. Most of the tribunal slept or drank in surrounding hostels. Laughter drifted from one doorway and died when they approached. Inside, the main chamber lay empty except for ash smell, and the claymstone glinting under moonlight. The same dais where Torin had tried to reduce Era to a mark stood unguarded for a rare hour. Era stepped onto it first. Alexander followed and halted at the center ring etched for rights. He set the ledger down and turned to her with both hands visible. Once dawn comes, every decision here has witness teeth. You choose now what survives public light. She took off her outer wool and folded it beside the ledger. Her tunic sleeve still bore Brindle's blood in a dark, stiff crescent. I choose consequences I can name. He moved closer, slow enough for refusal. She caught his collar and pulled him the last distance. Their mouths met with no ritual words, only the scrape of stubble, the taste of cold air, and the jolt of long-denied hunger breaking surface. His hands bracketed her ribs but did not slide lower until she guided one to her waist. She unbound her hair and let it fall across both their faces like a curtain, while the hall watched in silence from carved antlers and empty benches. Desire surged fast, almost reckless. He lifted her onto the edge of the stone, breath rough, and she pulled him closer by the back of his neck. Then both of them stopped at once, as if they had reached a ledge in the dark and felt the drop. Era's forehead rested against his shoulder. If we finish this here, she said, breath ragged, Torin says I proved his charge. He'll call it impulsive mating under authority pressure. He'll drag it into record as evidence against autonomy. Alexander pressed his lips to her temple and forced his voice steady. If we stop now, he says you were coerced and withdrew. He will write whatever keeps him upright. She lifted her head and looked at him, eyes clear despite the shaking in her hands. Then we answer in open hall. At dawn. No hiding, no back corridor, no secret he can twist. He searched her face for a long beat, then nodded once. At dawn. They kissed again, slower this time, deliberate, a vow without witnesses close enough to interrupt. He touched the inside of her wrist exactly where the claim stylus had waited and left no mark. She traced the scar across his knuckles and memorized its line as if taking inventory for hard winter. Their breathing eased. The urgency did not vanish, but it settled into something steadier. At the base of the dais, Brindle lay with her chin on her paws and watched them with one eye half open. When Era glanced down, Brindle huffed as if to say hurry, heal, end this. Era pulled her outer wool back on and tied it with fingers that still trembled. We should sleep for an hour. Alexander glanced at the ledger. 1 hour. Then we stand up in daylight and break him where he built this. Dawn bled gray through antler windows when the bell called reconvening. Witnesses filed in with stiff shoulders and gossip already formed. The ledger board by the door still showed 84 witness cuts from the previous session. The clerk added no new marks and nodded to confirm the same signatories were present. He ran his finger down each notch before stepping back, as if the wood itself could verify continuity. Torin entered robed in dark red, cuff cleaned but not fully. Brindle's earlier smear had set into the thread seams and darkened there. He took his seat as if nothing had shifted overnight. Era stood on the claim side by choice, not because anyone pointed. Alexander stood opposite, sealed ledger now opened and wrapped in cloth under one arm. Sable waited at the rail with her salt bag and receipt strips tucked in her belt. Brindle lay near the front post, bandage fresh, head up. Torin opened with ritual cadence. Recess ended. Claim completion resumes. Alexander spoke before the gavel could fall. Objection under oath text section on fabricated evidence. Torin's eyes narrowed. State basis. 2 staged death sites used to justify emergency levy and this forced pairing proceeding. Alexander raised the ledger bundle. Casualty record in my custody since border entry. Tampered entries traced to this hall. A rustle moved through benches as heads turned, and one elder leaned forward with both hands on knees. Torin extended one hand. Produce record to the chair. Alexander did not surrender it yet. First witness, Era. No leading prompts, no speech-making, just one line. Describe what you personally observed. Era stepped into the ring. Her voice carried clean. 3 days prior to yesterday's hearing, I gathered feverwort at the North Reed Road and yarrow at Ridge Bend. No kills, no blood, no scavenger sign. Last night those same roads held staged remains. Goat hide, lime spread, knife-scored bones, canvas transport fibers. She looked directly at the elders, then at Torin. I know those places by plant and soil, not rumor. Torin tried to cut in. Herb work does not qualify as forensic. Alexander lifted a palm without taking his eyes off Era. Second witness, Sable. Sable entered with boots still dusted white from her store floor. I sold lime and canvas to Torin's men before moonrise on the night the false kills appeared. They paid from the court pouch. She held up twine and receipt strips. Same spool fiber as the staging sacks. Same salt grit in the knots because they loaded at my stall. I watched them tie it. Torin barked, "Conjecture." Sable's laugh came hard. "Conjecture is when I guess. This is when I watched, weighed, took rings, and wrote receipts, while your men complained about the price." Alexander stepped to the claimstone, set the ledger flat, and opened it to the altered pages. "Seal broken in witness view," he said, making the process explicit for the clerk. The clerk nodded, stylus already moving. Alexander turned pages slowly, showing scraped entries and overwritten casualty lines for 17 hamlets. Original counts here, altered dates here, levy increases tied to fabricated deaths here. He slid the book toward the elders so they could run fingertips over the lifted fibers. The middle elder did so, grimaced, and looked up. Torin stood abruptly, chair legs scraping. The emissary exceeds mandate. Pairing law and casualty audit are separate channels. Alexander's voice stayed calm. Not under your oath text. He nodded toward the wall panel where magistrates had carved foundational lines. Era stepped closer and read aloud the clause Torin had made novices repeat for years. Coerced claims stand void where evidence is fabricated before levy or right. Her tone sharpened on each legal noun. Your words, Torin. Your oath. A long pause followed, broken only by Brindle's nails clicking as she moved from shadow to stand beside Era's feet. Bandage clean, shoulders stiff, eyes bright and fixed. Sable pointed to the wolf. "And there's your chain from hall to pit." He ordered her removed. She bled along the route his men used to drag staging sacks. We tracked it in the dark. The blood is still there if anyone wants to walk it. Torin's face blanched under beard. Animal behavior is not testimony. Blood on stone is, Era said. So are your men's purchases. So are your edits. He lunged for the ledger. Alexander caught his wrist mid-reach and lowered it, controlled and unmistakable, then released him immediately as 2 guards stepped in. "Do not compound this." The elder at center, silent until then, rose and took the gavel from Torin's hand. No flourish, just possession. Seat withdrawn, pending immediate finding. Torin stared as if language had abandoned him. The elder turned to the benches and spoke with formal weight. By oath clause read aloud, and supported by material proof, all coercive claim actions initiated under this levy are void. The room exhaled in a wave, Mutters, one sharp sob quickly muffled, the creak of old wood as bodies shifted. Torin recovered enough to spit. "You'd unmake statute for one stubborn woman?" Era stepped onto the center ring, shoulders squared. "You tried to make me an example so your forged tallies could pass unchallenged. You failed." The elder faced her formally. "State your standing choice under lawful autonomy." She answered without glancing to either side. "I retain my land as independent holder. I accept levy obligations by contract only. No compelled pairing. No transferred claim over body or boundary." Her voice reached the back bench and did not shake. "I choose lawful autonomy in this hall and beyond pack statute." For the first time since entering, she turned toward Alexander. Torin, desperate, threw one last weapon. "He can still claim by right of successful challenge. Crown precedence." Alexander cut him off. "I decline claim right." He said it clearly enough for the clerk to carve and for every witness to repeat later. No coercion through legal loophole, no ownership by gratitude. I remain by her side if she asks. And only while she asks. Era's breath hitched once, then steadied. "I ask." Sable smacked the salt bag with her palm like a drumbeat that made 3 people jump and then laugh despite themselves. Brindle leaned her weight into Ira's shin and finally relaxed her jaw. Torin looked from wolf to ledger to witnesses and understood too late that the stage he had built for humiliation now held proof against him. The elder motioned to the side door. "Torin departs this hall stripped of seat until separate judgment." 2 guards approached, and for once no one mistook whose orders they served. Torin jerked his sleeve free of one grasp and walked, trying for dignity, failing at pace. As he passed Era, he hissed, "You'll regret standing outside the pack." She met him with level gaze. "I stood outside for 6 years. I know the weather." He was escorted out without another word. Proceedings continued long enough to formalize restoration in spoken ritual. Levy status corrected, false fines struck, land rights affirmed before all 84 listed witnesses. The elder recited each corrective line. The clerk repeated and marked. Era answered assent where required. Sable testified once more to close the evidentiary thread, repeating purchase details with dates, quantities, and payment source until no one could claim confusion. Alexander remained near but did not touch Era unless she shifted toward him first. Every choice stayed visible. When the final acknowledgement was called, the elder set the gavel down and said, "Record stands. Let no secondary tribunal reopen coerced claim on these grounds without new material evidence." The clerk carved the closing notch. By afternoon, the hall emptied in uneven streams. People carried away their own versions of what had happened, but none could erase what they had heard in open circle: fabricated deaths, voided coercion, declined claim right. Torin's chair remained empty on the dais, angled slightly where he had shoved back from it. Outside, light warmed the stone steps. Era sat on the low wall where moss grew between blocks and cleaned dried blood from Brindle's shoulder bandage, swapping old linen for fresh. Brindle endured it with a grumble, then nosed Era's palm for the herb paste she hated and needed. Era spread it carefully and tied off the wrap with a surgeon's knot. Sable leaned against the doorpost with arms crossed, grin sideways. "My stall's going to be loud tonight. Half the market will ask if I really called him a liar in open hall." "You did," Era said. "I did." Sable pushed off the post. "Good day's work." She touched Era's shoulder, brief and firm, then headed down Market Road before thanks could turn soft and sticky. Alexander came out carrying nothing but his cloak. The opened ledger had gone to custody with the elders, and the stripped canvas sample with it. He stopped within arm's length and waited until Era looked up. She finished tying the knot on Brindle's bandage, checked it once more, then stood. "You stayed," she said. "I said I would if asked." She held out her hand, wrist bare where claim ink had never landed. "Walk me home beyond the statute posts." He took her hand with no ceremony and no witness required. Brindle rose, stretched, and fell in at Era's other side, limping only slightly. They descended the hill from the Hall of Antlers toward river paths, lined with frost-bent grasses. Behind them, bells marked evening levee in measured strikes. Ahead, the marsh opened in silver channels and herb plots waiting for tending. Era breathed in wet earth, wolf fur, wood smoke from distant cook fires, and the iron salt trace of the man beside her, then breathed out something she had carried tight for years. No gavel followed them down the road. No clerk called them back. Only the quiet sound of boots and paws on cold ground as they crossed beyond the posts and kept going.